Okay, good morning. So I'm just back from almost 2 months of meditation. And the last class before I left, we were talking about the 4 Paramattha Dhammas: consciousness or citta, mental factors, vipassana, matter or rupa, and nibbana. So the next step is to start to go into a bit more detail. And I'm going to be going into a bit more detail on consciousness or citta. And it just so happens that most of the last 2 months, I have been doing citta vipassana. All right, so which is meditation on consciousness. So I'll be sharing with you some meditative experiences that I had and talk about how that relates to the nature of consciousness, to the yogi, but also what's happening behind the scenes in daily life. Okay, let's try to go to the next screen. First, I'll start with the wrong view of consciousness. If you describe consciousness as saying, I am aware through consciousness, I am aware with consciousness, I am aware using consciousness, this is a wrong understanding of consciousness. It sounds fine from a conversational point of view, but if you are in a meditation retreat, meditating, and start talking to the teacher using words like this, like I, everything is centered around self. And so you still haven't developed very far in your practice. The correct view is it is consciousness that is aware. Consciousness is awareness. And consciousness is how all the other things that are going on in the mind, the associated mental factors, are aware of the object of whatever is the object of consciousness. Getting a little bit more specific, if you report to your teacher, I am aware of rising, falling. I watched the rising happen. I watched the falling happen. I saw this, I saw that. The teacher will be listening and hear I. Every sentence starts with I. Okay? It shows that you're still clinging to this concept of I. Something that I learned many, many years ago is to intentionally change the language to eliminate I. Not just during a retreat interview, but as much as possible when discussing spiritual things. So there is awareness of rising, falling, or there is rising, falling. Rising happens, falling happens. Those are different ways of describing the same experience without putting a self as an observer. Another example, when you say, I feel pain in my knee, well, that's a very clear sign to the teacher. I feel pain. My knee. There's a self behind all that is experienced. There's the self being inserted. This is not denying that pain is arising, just saying there is pain. And the difference between the two is a difference in perspective. And I'll keep coming back to that perspective again and again. I can tell you that at the beginning of a retreat, this is what you could say. But you will say, I feel pain. But as your mindfulness, as mindfulness develops, I said as mindfulness develops, it becomes, there's pain. And pain is something that is experienced, it's like right in front of you. It's right in front, being observed, rather than a I, that is experiencing it. Actually, the scientists have shown that this whole concept of an I is artificially constructed by the mind to try and make sense of all of the experiences that organizes around this concept of an I. But in meditation retreat, pretty soon this I falls away, and instead of I feel pain, it is there is pain. The pain is pulling, it's hard, it's hot, describing the pain rather than, oh, I am in so much pain. I am hurting so much. Why is my knee? I want to move my knee. All of that is self. Whereas saying there is pain, it is strong, it gets stronger. Pain is a twisting pain, it is a pulling pain, it is a sour pain, it is a hard pain, it is a hot pain, it is a sharp pain. Those are describing, that's a different perspective, focusing on pain rather than the I that is feeling. Now I'm going to go back to a sutta that we covered earlier and expand upon it, because this is an important sutta that relates to experience of consciousness. Dependent on the I informs, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as a condition, there is feeling. What one feels, one perceives or labels in the mind. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one proliferates, expands upon. Right? That's the wording of the sutta. And you may remember that I took the wording of that sutta and converted it into this kind of a flow chart that shows the sense base, which is I. In other words, this I here is the EYE, this I here is the retina. Okay? The retina object is a visible object, a little patch of color. Now, when there is a working retina and impinging upon this a color, that is a condition for eye consciousness or consciousness to arise. The meeting of the three is called contact. With contact as a condition, feeling arises. Notice the language. The language of the first three, all these steps above the red line, focuses on a automatic reaction, something that happens automatically. Following that, perception, thinking, and proliferation, it uses the word, what one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one proliferates. So it starts to become personal. It becomes subjective. Sense-based object, consciousness, contact, feeling, those are objective. It just happens, a mechanical thing that just happens. After that, there is a subjective reaction to that feeling, starting with perception, my thinking, and then my proliferation becomes personal at this point. Actually, from an Abhidhamma point of view, consciousness, contact, and feeling is a single event. It's one citta. This is a mind moment that arises at the retina. There is one instant of this consciousness together with contact and feeling happening at the retina that experiences the sense of the object, the visible object, because of the sense base, because of the retina and the visible form. There is a single event. Below, perception, thinking, and proliferation are a series of processes, not a single event. This happens in a split second. A single event, the one citta, happens in a billionth of a second. After that, it can go on for many seconds of perception, thinking, and proliferation. Let's go into a little bit more detail what's involved in perception, thinking, and proliferation. Diving quite deep now. The perception processes. Okay. We start with a sense door process, 17 mind movements, taking in the visible object and experiencing the visible object at the retina. That's the event. After that, there's a whole bunch of processes that go together to make up perception. In the Abhidhamma, it starts with what's called the confirmation mind door process. Now, this single event, the patch of color activating consciousness at the retina, happens at the eye door. It enters through the mind door. Then that same object is copied to the mind door for further processing. And this can be experienced by a yogi. I have experienced this many times, and I will explain by giving an analogy of walking the dog about how this is experienced. First, consciousness is at the eye, then it comes to the mind, different place. Then mind starts to work on it. Now, what do I mean by work on it? Processes, many processes, millions of processes, gathering, grasping the object as a whole. Initially, it was just one little patch of color at one little point in the retina. Then it's like a jigsaw puzzle. At the mind, it grabs many, and builds up the whole picture. I am seeing what I'm seeing right now, a whole room, the whole field of vision is made up of millions of little dots that come in at the retina one at a time, and then the mind glues them all together so I see the whole picture. Sorry. So the whole picture is seen. Gotta not use the word I. So the whole picture is seen. So think of this looking at the big picture. Another example is at the ear. There's a vibration at the eardrum. Confirmational process brings that vibration into the mind door. The mind door then takes many vibrations and puts them together, and I hear a sound. Not just a little vibration, not a minuscule vibration, but a whole sound. So that's the object as a whole. The big total perspective of what I'm seeing with my eyes, or the whole sound of what I'm hearing. Then, the example of recognizing the color, separating out the light from the dark. This is what's in this whole view. There's white, there's dark. And that takes many processes because it's a big picture. I got to really build it up, start splitting things up. Then grasping the meaning. When I start splitting things out, there are people. Okay? Recognizing the meaning. This is my class. Grasping the name of the object. Individuals that I recognize. Recognizing the name of the object. So these are individual people, and then recognizing the name of the object. All of these things in the mind, spinning and building. All of this is perception. And it can be experienced, even though it's written up in using all these technical terms in the Abhidhamma. I have experienced it many times watching the mind go through all of this. Running to the door, the eye door, picking up an object, coming back, and building up this whole big picture, and then things, if you will, coming into focus. Realizing, oh, this is my class, or this is what's happening at this moment. So these are the perception processes. So it starts with whatever appeared in the retina, ends with naming the object. Okay, Brother Quay, right? That's what it ended with, right? So that's what the perception ended with. Then the thinking processes take over. These create a relationship between the named object and a self through craving, conceit, and views. So now I'm starting to personalize. Yes, I recognize this. Yeah, they've been here for many years. I've known them for years. So, oh, this is a new person to me. Right? So I'm starting to make it personal, this thinking process. And that takes a lot of thinking as well, a lot of activities at the mind door. Then the proliferation process is imagining and fantasizing and coming up with all these stories. Actually, in daily life, 90% of the time, the mind is doing this proliferation stuff, just imagining and fantasizing. I used the example the other day of picture comes in, walking down the street, something comes in through the eye, then there is perception. Oh, it's a flower. That's perception. Thinking process. I like flowers, my wife likes flowers. That is the thinking process, relating it to the eye. Proliferation process. My wife smiles when I give her the flower. Now, this is complete. This whole proliferation is completely separated from the reality of the moment. My wife's not there. I may or may not buy the flower. All of this is where the mind spends most of its time. When mindfulness increases, the mind starts to work backwards through this process, and we start to understand, observe perception of the object being experienced at the sense door, and then the perception aspect. We're cutting off the signs and features. I use that term very clearly, signs and features, because the Buddha used that in a number of suttas. When the Buddha was asked, give me the teaching in brief, the Buddha said, when there is seeing, there is only seeing, no signs and features. In other words, cut off all of the proliferation, all of the thinking, and much of the perception process, to get right back to the primary element of the sense door and a recognition before the ego comes in. Here is a diagram that Bhakti Suchima gave as part of his Dhamma talks. He drew this diagram on the whiteboard, and so I copied it here. We start with A, which is the sense door process. This is at the eye door, right? Where it takes in the visible object with the eye door. It's a paramata, it's an alternate reality as the object. It's 17 quadrants. Then remember, perception, the next step was reproducing the paramata object in the mind door. This is a mind door process. This is the confirmational. Then there is a mind door process that consolidates, brings everything together. Then there are a whole bunch of mind door processes. Consolidate, bring everything together. Then there are a whole bunch of mind door processes which look at meanings. And then a whole bunch of mind door processes that create labels for names. Right? I'm going to skip the Bhakti Sujiva spent some time on inferential knowledge and the experiential knowledge and inferential knowledge, some of those concepts for meditation. But basically, he went through this whole process. And this is what he was describing. A is, of course, the sense door at the ear, the eye. And then there is the perception processes that he was describing. And he mentioned that when the sense door process takes a very great object with registration, it is followed by reproduction at the mind door. In other words, when there is a very great object or a significant object to you, okay, that is decided to be a significant object, like I'm looking at things right now. A few moments ago, I noticed that there was a tree outside and a leaf on it. I wasn't focusing on it. That's not a significant object. So it didn't process. However, individuals that I am seeing are significant objects to me, very great objects. So they do get processed. The leaf outside doesn't get processed any further. It's not a very great object. The individuals in front of me are very great objects. Consolidating is sometimes followed by new sensible process. Sometimes after putting together, when the mind is putting together this whole group of images, it keeps going back and collecting more, collecting more, collecting more. It's like running back and forth, back and forth. So I'm now going to, again, this is from a diagram from Buddhism. There's two ways of looking at consciousness. I'm not going to focus just on the consciousness aspect. What Bhakti calls the digital view, I call it zoomed in. In my experience, I call it zoomed in when you really look at the detail. Then what Bhakti calls the cloud view, I call it zoomed out. You're looking at it from 15,000 feet, 50,000 feet, you're looking at the big picture. So zoom in, zoom out, digital and cloud. Gives you a different experience. The digital view, when one zooms in, one experiences what is happening inside the mind. Now, when does it do this? At the mind door. Look at the mind door, and what becomes obvious are all the space with all these little stars blinking, or stars not blinking yet, but just in the whole space, there are these objects. And I want to share with you something that's happened to me a few times. This screen, sometimes watching the rising, falling, and one zooms in on the consciousness. The consciousness is like a TV screen. And when watching the TV screen, sometimes there is this bird flying across the top of the screen. It's not a bird, but it is a very fast object. It's going to change, moving across the screen. So something is happening. Consciousness in the background. There's something in the foreground moving very quickly. We're looking at the mind door. The mind door knows, this is a sound. A sound is now being experienced. It's experienced moving very fast, fluttering across the screen. How does the mind door know it's a sound? It just knows. There's no thinking, there's no analysis. It's just awareness of sound. Is this sound a high sound? Is it a low sound? Is it a loud sound? Soft sound? Is the sound to the right, to the left? Is it a bird? Is it a cricket? No idea. Irrelevant question. It's a sound. The mind is experiencing sound. Has not yet got to the stages where it's starting to add in the features of, oh, that's a cricket, or oh, that's a person. It's simply the experience of sound. And sometimes there is a cloud coming across the screen. It's like a cloud. I'm using a lot of similes and metaphors, but it's like a cloud coming across the screen of consciousness. It can get halfway across, float halfway across, and then dissolve. Sometimes it floats all the way across. Somehow the mind knows that is a thought. Is it a pleasant thought, unpleasant thought? Is it what's thinking of? No idea. There's a thought going across the mind. Then, across the mind, there is this black wave of darkness. This is pain. Is it pain in the leg? Is it pain? What kind of pain? No idea. Just know that there is pain. So I sat watching this for 2 hours. For 2 hours, absolutely just watching fluttering of sound, floating and dissolving of thought, the black fog of pain, without being able to identify anything, any of the details, not knowing anything about the sound, anything about the thought, anything about the pain, other than they exist. For 2 hours observing this, there was mindfulness, continuous mindfulness for 2 hours. Not kind of continuous mindfulness, absolutely continuous mindfulness. Every mental process was with mindfulness. It was like a block. And after 2 hours, coming out of this experience, reviewing back, it was amazing because there was not a single defilement, there was no attachment, there was no aversion, there was no strong feelings. There was just experience without any defilements. And this is what we call in jhana. One of the characteristics of jhana is no defilements. This was not a jhana because I wasn't concentrating on one thing to the exclusion of all else. But it had the same effect as a jhana because there were, for a block of time, a couple hours, and this can happen for 2 or 3 hours. Jhanas can go on for days. This can happen for a couple hours of absolutely no defilements. And this is such an unusual experience as compared to how we normally live our daily life. I mean, for example, at this very moment, yes, there's experience of my feet pressing against the floor, but there's also a slight feeling occasionally of a little discomfort. So I shift myself, I shift my weight. There's small little defilements sneaking into the thinking process all the time. You hardly notice, but through this 2 hours, there was zero, absolutely zero. And then what happened is, with continuous mindfulness after 2 hours, concentration started to increase naturally. As concentration started to increase naturally, the borders of the screen started spreading out to infinity. And this was a change. This was a change to the experience. And that change to the experience triggered a latent reaction. It was like a hand coming up from the ground and grabbing me and saying, "Oh, don't do that, don't go there." It was fear. And it broke the entire experience. So while this was happening, no defilements. But when the experience mutated or evolved or changed naturally, I should have just been more mindful of it. But what actually happened is that change of experience triggered a non-acceptance of the change. And that non-acceptance, aversion, reached up from like a hand coming out from the grave and grabbing me. It was very scary. And the whole thing collapsed in a second because of this non-acceptance of the change. So this is the space in room. Okay? Where you're looking very carefully at each of the objects. The spacing, you're looking at, you're watching all the objects presenting themselves, not getting caught up in the details, the signs and features of the object. Can't name any of them object. So I know what type of object they were. I know that they're a sound. I know that they're a thought. I know that they're pain. But after that, no idea. No idea what kind of sound, what kind of thought, what kind of pain. The whole thing, it didn't come up. It was simply cut off at that point. Didn't go into any more deep of the conceptualization or the proliferation. It just stayed at the perception. Okay. Now on the cloud level, watching from up on high, the first experience is what Bhante Jiva calls walk the dog. Now, where he gets this analogy from is, imagine you are walking your dog. The dog, what does it do? It runs here, runs there, runs here, runs there, gets distracted, just runs from here to there all the time, then comes back to where you are. This walk the dog is exactly what I talked about earlier, where watching on high, oh, consciousness is running to the eye. Then it's coming back to the mind door, and you can see it adding more stuff, and then running to the eye, and then running to the ear, and then running to the sense door, running to all the sense doors, gathering all this stuff. So you can watch the dog running around, watch the consciousness running back and forth between the various doors. Where do these doors live? The eye door, obviously at the eye. The ear door, the ear. Where does the mind door, where all this kind of happens? The experience of observing at the mind door is, it arises around the center of the body. In the later texts, not the original Abhidhamma texts, but the later texts, they called this the heart base, because it's somewhere around the heart. Don't take it literally, but it's kind of the experience is, the meditative experience is it's kind of around the heart of the body, but it's not inside, it's around the center. If I can use that terminology. And one can observe the confirmation of mind door, grasping the objects as a whole, recognizing the color, grasping the meaning, recognizing the meaning, grasping the name, recognizing the name. So observing the mind going through all these machinations. I mean, so for example, I was doing walking meditation and observing while doing walking meditation how consciousness is moving around. Consciousness would run to the eye door, pick up, catch a color, come back, and it was like building it up bit by bit in the diffusion model, like building it up, and they go, oh, that's a person. Oh, that's Lily Kim. Oh, I know Lily Kim. He is my friend. Right? And think about my past interactions with that particular yogi. All of this, you can see it's all building up, layer by layer by layer by layer. Normally, it happens in a split second, and the mind is caught up in those imagining and fantasy about all my past experiences. I see Lily Kim and think about all my past experiences. It happens immediately, normally. But because there was mindfulness, concentration, there was an ability to observe step by step by step this whole thing building up. Okay. This is the first level. We're now going to get into deeper levels. Any questions on what I've talked about so far? Questions on what I've talked about so far?
Brother Rob, Chris here.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, hi. Sorry, didn't get the connection between the cloud and the digital. Can you explain it one more time?
Okay. Cloud is zooming out, looking at the big picture. So seeing all this activity happening between how consciousness is moving here, moving there, jumping here, jumping there, building up, building up. Your perspective, and perspective is a very important term here. Perspective is a 50,000 foot view. The digital is zooming in, where, say, just like in my TV screen, I was only looking at consciousness and the things that were reflected in it at that moment. There was no zooming out. I didn't see any motion of things, of consciousness. I saw the objects were moving, but not the consciousness. So think of cloud as zoom out, digital as zoom in. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks. Got it.
Okay, other questions? All right, let's continue with the space in the room. The space in the room, the TV screen. I said that things were moving constantly, right? And constantly evolving. However, what I did not talk about is dissolution, dissolving, vipassana. So when there is the experience of those objects within the consciousness disappearing, constantly disappearing, like flickering flashes of lightning or twinkling of a star, that is the next level, which is called stars, which Buddhist people call stars. So you're still looking at zooming in, but things are constantly dissolving, changing. Okay? I talked earlier on the TV screen about the bird flying slowly or the cloud drifting and the black fog, but I didn't talk about it disappearing. When it starts disappearing, when it becomes obvious that all these things are instantly disappearing, the perspective has evolved to the stars phase. Going to the cloud point of view, one can move from walking the dog to the candle and moths. At the walk the dog, you're watching the whole scene take place, watching consciousness run here and there. Candle and moths, the candle flame is consciousness. The moths are the objects. So you can see the bright light of consciousness and then constantly objects like kamikaze diving into the flame and disappearing. Small objects, the flame flickers a little bit. When a big object comes in, it wishes back and forth, it still stays lit. So here, the focus, you're moving the focus to just the consciousness, and the moths are the objects that keep coming in and dissolving in the consciousness. So the consciousness isn't moving anymore. It's it isn't moving between the eye door and the mind door as it was in Walk the Dog. Now the consciousness, it's like you've landed on the consciousness. And now the objects are just moving to you, moving to the consciousness. It's like they're zooming in. The stars and fishes. The stars evolves to the whirlpool and fishes, where the consciousness itself starts to act like a whirlpool, sucking in all of the objects. The fishes are the objects. It starts sucking them in like a vortex, spinning, and frogs and fish getting pulled into and absorbed into the center of the consciousness. That's the whirlpool and fishes experience. The flight of dandelion, here, it's like you are aware, the dandelion is consciousness. So there's awareness of the consciousness, the dandelion seed, rather, is consciousness. There's awareness of consciousness, but there's also awareness of everything that's going on around. There's a general awareness of what's going on around the consciousness. So here, one sees the The seed is the experience of consciousness, but one is also aware of everything going on around it. Space in the room and walk the dog are basically at the same level of practice. Stars and candle and moths are basically the same level of practice. It's where you start to see things change. The whirlpool and fishes inside the dandelion, you start to see it's the same level of practice. So the practice deepens in these different stages. And I want to make it clear here, there is zooming in, zooming out, switching between cloud and digital, back and forth, and the experience is experienced differently. Okay? Because it zooms in and zooms out. And I'll talk about that perspective more in a moment. But this Abhidhamma then talks about more advanced, which I'm not going to go into today, which he calls prayer beats, constantly spinning around and flying geese, clouds of lightning, river of consciousness, merging and citta at the delta, and then finally the dragon of insight cutting through the clouds of ignorance. I'm not going to talk about those. They're quite rarefied experiences. Now I'm going to share with you, Abhidhamma led a guided citta vipassana meditation. He said, okay, visualize consciousness. And so he went through a bunch of preparatory stuff, calming the mind and so on, and visualize consciousness. And I will share with you my experience and how it evolved. There was initially this big round circle around the middle of the body. I won't call it the heart, but it's at the mind. So at the mind door. So the mind, there was sitting at the mind door awareness of consciousness. Then that's the citta. Consciousness is like a portal, thick glass that connected the inside, which is inside the citta, with outside. Outside is the sense objects or mind object. So the way that I experienced consciousness is like a glass window, thick glass window. That's zoomed out. That is the cloud view. When I zoomed, then I zoomed out and looked at bigger picture, all the different citta that were inside the mind were reflected in the consciousness. Just like when you look at a window, you can and you can see a reflection of what's inside your own room. That's what you can see, that the consciousness, that glass porthole, had a reflection of what's going on. So if the mind was dominated, if the citta was dominated by attachment, one could see the cloud or the reflection of attachment in the glass. Or if the mind was dominated by detachment, one could see and experience the reflection of non-attachment reflected in the glass. So this is one way of observing all of the citta through consciousness, is by seeing it reflected in that glass. And it's also the interaction between the citta can be seen. Looking through practicing Dhamma vipassana, looking inside the mind, one sees that the attachment citta is having an influence, making all of the other citta sticky to the object, more sticky. It disturbs or it pollutes, it corrupts the other citta in a certain way. when concentration was strong, when concentration is strong in the mind, can observe concentration by itself, can observe concentration effect on all of the other cetasikas, kind of binds it together with a big wrapper, or one can look into consciousness and see the reflection of concentration through the consciousness. Switching perspective now, zooming out further, there is this object conditioning, which is the relationship between the mind and the object, whatever the object was, the rising, falling, whatever the object was, there was this connection, which I've shown here as a yellow lightning bolt. It was like energy connecting the mind with the object, and it changed. When the object was just coming into existence, this conditioning caused the object was like pulling the mind out of a well using a rope and a bucket. It's like pulling a bucket of water out of a rope, out of a well. So it was pulling the object itself was pulling the mind into existence, the experience. Before there was the mind, before the object arose, the mind was in the well. The arising of the object pulled that consciousness, pulled the citta into existence. During the existence phase of the object, it was like a cane or supporting a handrail that supported and stabilized the consciousness or the whole citta. And then when the object started to dissolve, then through object conditioning, it was like the object was taking that citta, that consciousness, and laying it down like a mother taking her baby and laying it down to sleep and gently pulling her hands away. So these are my experiences of how the relationship between the object and the mind varied. And I just want to mention here, this arising, existing, and dissolution, that happens millionth of a second. But it's not through analysis, it's not through thinking that there's awareness of all this. It is through panya, or awareness, insight, that the object, the nature of the arising nature of the object, the existence nature of the object, and the dissolution phase of the object become obvious, even though they happen instantaneously, and how each of those different phases of the object cause how they interact with the mind through object conditioning, Aramana in Pali. Now, I took that object, which was like a piece of paper with stuff written on it, and changed perspective. Instead of looking at it like on top, I looked at the side of it. Okay? It's the same object, just a different perspective. And it is experienced completely differently. You can no longer tell, and it is no longer relevant what's written on the paper. You're just looking at the edge of the paper. And there are millions of these floating down, flying down, individual arising and falling away, rising, falling away, rising, falling away. What is it that is arising and falling away? You don't know. You can't see because you're not looking at the top. You're just looking at the edge. Then, zooming in on the bottom one, the last one, the most recent one, the stack of objects rising and falling, actually just starts dissolving. The one at the very base keeps dissolving. They don't stack up, they don't build up, they're just dissolving. While all this is happening, the whole story, there is an observing mind, or a knowing mind. Bhante calls it the knowing mind, I call it the observing mind. Kind of like watching the show. sometimes watching, enjoying watching, being attached to what's going on, going, oh, that's interesting. Or sometimes being like a reporter, watching with joy. Okay. All right. All of this changing perspective. All this is just constantly changing perspective. And I'm going to go through how this changing perspective relates to different levels of insight knowledge. The first insight knowledge, this is observing the ultimate reality. And the feeling of mind, the joy. Okay, that was just awareness. That is awareness of joy, not any deeper than that. But it's a necessary step. Built on top of that first insight is the second insight, which is when there is the awareness of the arising as well as the existence phase. So looking at how the chittasikas interact with each other and how they're reflected in consciousness, that's Dhamma vipassana. Citta vipassana, where there's awareness, is awareness of all three phases, the arising, the existence, and dissolution. That's citta vipassana. When through object conditioning, awareness of arising, existing, and dissolution, that is citta vipassana, where there was awareness that the citta was coming into existence, being pulled out of the well, stabilized during the existence phase, and then being gently laid down during the dissolution phase. Then the rising, falling, the kind vipassana, when there was changing the perspective from looking at the piece of paper from on top to looking at the edge of the paper, you just see the beginning and the fact that it's incredibly thin. That's Abhidhamma, or viewing the edges of the rising falling. And then finally, when looking at the complete dissolution, how when these little pieces of paper were constantly dissolving at the very bottom of the stack, that is constant dissolution. This is the the fifth insight knowledge. Now, there's other insight knowledges after this, where there's kind of like an emotional reaction, the jnanas, where the mind starts to react to what is experienced. Remember how I talked about how when dealing with the TV screen, when the consciousness was the screen, and when concentration increased, the screen started expanding to infinity in all directions. The latent hand that pulled out and grabbed me. Here, when the mind experiences constant dissolution, fear is the latent hand that comes in and starts pulling at you. And then there is the wanting to get away from all of this. Another hand that comes and pulls. So after the fifth insight, there's a lot of hands coming out of the grave and grabbing you. I'm using a little bit scary analogies, but that can be what it is experienced like. Okay, I've added in a whole bunch of other stuff. Any questions on this? All right. Now, all these experiences are pre-conceptual, before words. Why did I choose these analogies? Okay, I chose a bunch of ways of describing things. Things that I always said, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this. Why did I choose those particular ones? If you go on a retreat, your way of describing will likely be very different. Okay? And this is where the skill of the teacher comes in. The teacher that's listening during the interview has heard so many yogis at that level describing it, they'll go, okay, yeah, I know where that person is. It takes them literally a couple of minutes. Sometimes even how you walk in, they know what stage you're at. And that's the purpose of the interview. It's not a test. Purpose of the interview is not a test. The purpose of the interview is to help the teacher know where you are so that the teacher can give you relevant guidance and help. That's the purpose of the interview. So don't worry. Don't try to pretend during an interview. The teacher will see through you immediately. Go in, be honest with your experience. And because they've heard so much, so many different yogis' experiences, they will know exactly where you are. They will know what challenge is coming next, and they will give you guidance on how to face that challenge. But how come I chose these analogies in my description? Part of it comes from what's called temperament, citta. According to the Sangha, there are 6 temperaments: greedy, hating, deluded, faithful, intelligent, and speculative. Now, you might wonder, basically, this is psychological profiling done 1,600 years ago. Buddha was saying, here's how you judge a particular yogi, because he wants to help the teachers. I mean, there were about 50 people on the retreat, and Bhattacharya had to deal with 50 different yogis. Imagine most of them had experience with Bhattacharya before, but imagine there were 50 brand new yogis coming in that he had never met before at different levels of experience. To be an effective teacher, Bhattacharya would need to be able to quickly classify, oh, he's this kind of yogi, he's this kind of yogi, right? And so this is what the Sangha has done. He said there are 6 types of yogis. Bhattacharya said, okay, Rob, you are an intelligent type of yogi. How does he know that? I see flaws in conditioned things. How I walk, how I sit, how I stand, how I sleep, how I sweep, how I eat. He can observe all of these things about me and know that I'm an intelligent temperament. And there are different descriptions for each of the 6. So he's got a way of classifying by observing me which type of yogi I am. And then based on that, it will give the Sangha then says, okay, with each type of yogi, here's the kind of environment that they meditate well in. Here's the type of good meditation objects for them. Here's the type of, it goes through how to guide each of the 6 types. So it really helps smooth and streamline the whole process of guiding the yogi. So temperament is one aspect of why I picked those analogies. The other is conditioning. Conditioning from my past lives, conditioning from earlier in this life, and recent conditionings. Things like the recent Dhamma talk that I heard. Okay, the conditioning from earlier in this life. Right? I grew up in Canada, so I have a Western background and so on. You've got different conditioning than I do, and perhaps a different temperament than I do. So you are going to pick different analogies, and that's fine. Okay? There's no right analogy, there's no wrong analogy. They're just ways for the teacher to guide where you are so that they can give you advice on how to move forward. All right. All right, I'm going to quickly go through the Abhidhamma Sutta description of citta vipassana. The yogi knows the consciousness with lust as with lust. In other words, my experience was I see it reflected in the glass. Okay, I see attachment without lust, detachment. I see detachment. I know the mind as the consciousness is associated with attachment, or the mind is detached. With hate, without hate, with delusion, without delusion, shrunken, distracted, become great, not become great, superior, nothing superior, quieted, non-quieted, freed and not freed. Okay, here is in a graph, here a chart of seeing how these things connect together. All right, those are the same terms as used in the Abhidhamma Sutta, but shown in a bit of a flow chart. Basically, the progress is start out with a mind subject to a lot of defilements, with attachment, with illusion. Shrunken means tired, lazy. Distracted means restless. Not quieted means poor concentration. Those are the, now this is the starting point when you go into a retreat. You've got so much garbage that you've been collecting up. You need a few days, all this garbage to empty out. The mind is totally wrapped up in this stuff. This is unfree, all of this is unfree from the unconcentrated. Then the mind moves to a, without lust, without hatred, without delusion, it moves to a wholesome state of mind. Quieted means with concentration, up to access concentration. Not become great means it's good concentration, but not jhana. Not jhana. So this would be in the first 54 chittas. Become great is, these are the jhana chittas where great means jhana. Something superior means up until the highest level of jhana. Nothing is superior is the highest level of jhana. So this shows how consciousness, how the citta vipassana described in the Satipatthana Sutta is structured. Starting with unwholesome, wholesome, concentrated, and then concentrated, not become great, is up to access concentration. Become great is absorption concentration. Okay. Any questions on what I've been covering here? A lot of experiential type stuff from that retreat. Hopefully you've got a bit better understanding of consciousness, the experience of consciousness, and the different ways in which consciousness can be experienced, and how the experience of consciousness can jump between all the different perspectives, from looking at one moment being aware of the cetasikas, one moment being aware of the object, holding the citta, the next moment being aware of the face of the object, next moment being aware of the side of the object, next moment being aware of the dissolution of the object. All of these are different ways of different perspectives. And it's possible to jump between all of them, the different levels of insight knowledge, almost instantaneously. So, questions? All right. This is a bit of a heavier talk than normal, a very heavy talk. Yeah.
Have been going through all of these.
Yeah.
So, what is the next? What is the objective? What is the next moving forward?
Okay. How to use all of this?
Yeah. Then how we will go? And how we will flow what are the benefits?
Okay. The most important thing about all of this experience of consciousness is to separate it from a self. And I talked at the very beginning where I am experiencing selfless experience. I have experienced the very first slides that I talked about. Okay. How consciousness is actually a conditioned is a conditioned reality that is awareness, and is how mental factor becomes aware. Many people link consciousness with a self and say, I am aware through consciousness. All of this in-depth observing of the nature of consciousness is a way of taking a step back and saying, hey, consciousness is just something, a naturally arising phenomenon that plays a role in experience. It is not a self. It is not permanent. It is constantly changing. So it gives the benefit of going through all of this is a detachment from consciousness. Detachment from consciousness. Not through reading and thinking and analysis. You can read 1,000 times. Consciousness is not self. But it's still deeply part of the psyche. When one experiences the kinds of things that I've been through the last couple of months, it makes it easier to step back and say, oh, consciousness is just an arising phenomenon like so many other things. It's not a self. There is an increased level of detachment. And if one can become detached from consciousness, it becomes much easier to become detached from attachment. Much easier to become attached from aversion and all the other cast of characters. So it's not I am angry. It's anger has arisen. It's not I want. It's attachment has arisen because of causes, because of conditions. It arose naturally. It exists only for a moment. It does not define me. Anger does not define me. Attachment does not define me. Consciousness itself does not define me. Consciousness is simply a naturally arising phenomenon which arises because of conditions and then falls away naturally. So it starts to chip away at this idea of a self at the center of the universe.
It's necessary to go through this experience in order to be aware of self and consciousness different. Can the person not going through this experience be able to do that?
Okay. Can a person who has not, without going through meditation, separate the self from consciousness? One can read about it many times, but it's not easy. You need to experience. The Dhamma is to be experienced on one's own. Now, it is so ingrained, this attachment to a self, attachment to consciousness, that very difficult to separate them through thinking and analysis. And I could actually say it won't work. Thinking and analysis won't work. It will never happen. However, having said that, the thinking and analysis creates a fertile ground, whether in this life or the next life, for the deeper experience. It's only through deep personal experience that the possible to uproot the idea of self. I mean, I hope that helps, but it's not going to happen through reading and thinking and analyzing. It's not going to happen. The self is too ingrained. And even during a retreat like this, during the retreat, yes, it becomes so clear that consciousness is just one more conditioned phenomena. While it's being experienced in all these different ways, watching consciousness run from the eye to the mind and all these things, yeah. But the next morning I wake up, consciousness is still strong, a little bit weaker, but still strong. So while it's happening, there is a separation, but it takes to really uproot the sense of self needs First stage single, okay, the Sotapanna.
And once we do that, then we go out into the normal life. Will this consciousness be diluted or certain?
Because of my experience during this retreat, attachment to self is slightly diluted. Okay, also diluted. Diluted and diluted, right? Slightly. However, a Sotapanna that has uprooted it, it's gone, right? And the only way for someone to become a Sotapanna is Maggapala experiencing Nibbana. Once the Sotapanna has experienced Nibbana, that experience is strong enough to go, oh yeah, no way can there be a self because of what I have experienced. Then, so that experience uproots any future arising of this idea, wrong view of self. Yeah.
I'm pretty sharing with me. One thing I'm quite politically interested in, is that you were sharing your experience on the hand of the mirror. In that experience, I think everyone has a respect of things that you were concerned. So during that moment, probably you came out. Through that process, did you actually have any insights how to deal with this? And also, what
Okay. After the hand came up and grabbed me and pulled me back, in the next interview, I asked the teacher, how do I stop the hand from doing this? The teacher said, mindfulness and trusting in the process. Have faith, sada. Say, look, everything you've experienced so far has happened because of mindfulness. Okay? Have faith that the teaching, that the practice can deal with this. Don't yes, the hand will still come up, but if there is faith in the process, faith in mindfulness, just stick to noting, stick to the practice. So when things were dissolving, the hand came up, the teacher's answer was just note it. Just be aware. Apply mindfulness. Okay? Yes. There's awareness of the fear. Because one sees the fear as a arising phenomenon. Something that has arisen. It's not going to kill me. I mean, when I'm sitting meditating and there's pain, pain's not going to kill me. But it's a great object because it grabs the attention, it grabs the mind. Fear is a great object because it grabs the mind. Take it as an object, watch it change, look at the nature of it. I was so attached to watching the screen for 2 hours with no distractions, with no sleepiness, totally no defilements for 2 whole hours. And this comes up and disturbs me and just shook me, right? That's when the hand came up. Oh, I fell apart. It fell apart. The screen went away, all that fell apart because there was no more mindfulness. Mindfulness was destroyed. When I told the teacher about this, the teacher said, have faith in mindfulness. Use mindfulness to watch what is happening. Watch this latent defilement.
So next round you will try.
The next round I will try, and maybe I can last for more than 2 hours. That would be great, because I was very attached to watching the screen as it was. When the screen started to change, it was like my whole world was being shaken, and that led a very visceral, kind of very emotional kind of reaction. And so my latent fear, latent from in the ground, reached up and grabbed me.
For 2 hours.
It was not concentrating.
You're watching.
It was mindful.
mindful. So do you need the stamina? Do you
No, no.
person?
Okay,
So you don't have to be very healthy,
Okay.
young and vigorous man.
you're talking about energy.
Yeah. To watch for
Energy.
2 hours.
Watch for 2 hours took no energy. It has its own momentum.
So the old man will
One old man can also do it. It's about momentum. And energy is initially important to apply them to mindfulness. Okay. Now, energy can be used in one of two ways. Constructively. There's destructive ways, but constructively. Applying energy to mindfulness leads to continuous mindfulness. Continuous mindfulness naturally increases concentration. Concentration and continuous mindfulness lead to insight, wisdom. The other way is applying the energy to concentration, keeping the mind on that object. Okay, this is samatha practice. Now, so you don't worry about mindfulness, you just focus just on concentration. And those jhanas can last for days. How can somebody be in a state last like that, in that mental state for days? How much energy does it take? Very, very, very little. Because you don't have to be young for this, because once it starts, the momentum, it just carries on. So what I experienced for a couple hours didn't take energy, didn't take any. In fact, there was no energy. It was like things were just happening, all flowing naturally. There wasn't any application. There was no effort. It was effortless effort. Don't feel, oh no, tiredness? No. Tiredness is a defilement. There was no laziness. There was no tiredness. The mind was bright. Now, but I only experienced for a couple hours. People do jhana can do it for days. So energy is important at the very beginning. And that's why when you go on retreat, yeah, you're going to sleep the first couple of days. You're going to sleep a lot. You're tired, you sleep. Your body needs to sleep. Your mind needs for some sleep because you're just getting rid of the garbage. But after that, retreat was on and on and on. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, cool. Other questions? Okay. I didn't think I'd be able to get it done in an hour, and I was right. All right, so again, my next class will be on the 1st of May. 1st of March. Yeah, I made that mistake again. 1st of March, but it will be a remote one because I'll be in Sydney again. Yeah, it'll be an online. So if somebody could read the reflections.
Let us recall our 5 disappointments. We come to the temple with the sole purpose to study the Bible. We could fit and wise attention. We learn and understand some of what the teaching. Whenever there is any doubt or wrong understanding of the teaching, we seek to clear our doubts and strengthen our views. With a proper understanding of the Dharma, we can now put it into practice. The right understanding of the Dharma will produce right thought, that in turn give rise to right action, right speech, and right people. With such a right frame of mind, we can face the realities of life. May the knowledge begin through listening to the Dharma, discussing on the Dharma, and strengthening our view. Let us help us in overcoming any difficulty we may face. May all beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas, of all almighty powers, rejoice in these words we have acquired, and may they all back to the successor. May these words be a contributing cause for the realization of the Dharma. Idame Yunyam Ivana Sa Jayo. Let's start with the teacher. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Mother, mother.